Well, we are joined now by foreign policy expert Victoria Coates. Victoria, thanks for being here.
Of course, Virginia.
So we woke up on Wednesday morning to some pretty significant news as we watch developments continue in the Middle East. Right now, we are looking at a situation where one of Hamas's key leaders has been reportedly killed in a strike in Iran. Israel has not claimed that they carried this out, but they also have not denied it. They are believed to be the ones behind the strike. Victoria, who exactly was this leader that was killed, this Hamas leader that was killed?
No, in Virginia, you're 100% correct. This is a seismic event for the Middle East and really for the world, including the United States. So the deceased is Ismail Haniyeh, who was the quote-unquote political leader of Hamas. He was elected in the 2006 elections in Gaza that put Hamas in charge of the Strip. He then left Gaza in 2017, joined the office in Qatar that Obama had asked the Qataris to host as a way for the then Obama administration to communicate with Hamas in a third-party site in Doha. And he has been the real visible face of Hamas around the world, has traveled freely, including to Tehran this week, where he was to attend the inauguration of Iran's new president. And we have video of him just hours before the strike, embracing the supreme leader, Khomeini, and meeting openly with all of the Iranian officials. And so he's certainly not there on a good news mission. Mm-hmm. And what apparently happened is it was Israel, an Israeli asset like an F-35 made here in the United States, over Iraqi airspace, was able to fire a targeted missile at a specific house in Tehran. Wow. And that's why this is really extraordinary. As you might remember, in April, we had the unprecedented Iranian attack directly on Israel in retaliation for some other strikes the Israelis had done in Lebanon, and we had Iran openly attacking Israel for the first time. And before that, they've always used proxies, but we had this direct attack, and the Israelis wanted to respond very forcefully to it. And I think an action very similar to what they carried out last night to express to Iran that this is not permissible. You can't do this. But unfortunately, in a very, I think, heated phone call, President Biden told Prime Minister Netanyahu, no, we will not be with you if you do this. They then leaked that portion of the phone call to the press to make sure everybody knows the United States will not support you if you do something strong. And I believe the president's words were, take the win. But what Israel took at that point was the fact that it was now okay from the perspective of the United States to attack Israel. And I think things have gotten so bad that they felt, especially after the attack on the Druze village that murdered the 12 children and injured 40 more while they were just playing soccer, that they had to do more. They had to send a stronger message. And so that they executed this really extraordinary strike on Tehran.
Well, and I think the question is now, not only are we going to see retaliation from specifically Hamas, but also from Iran, given the fact that the strike was carried out within the Iranian capital. Is there going to be retaliation?
Well, they're probably chewing this over, because I think the Iranians probably didn't think that the Israelis could execute this kind of a strike. I mean, this is really the Israelis saying, we can reach out and touch you wherever you are. As such, it's reminiscent of the Soleimani strike in January of 2020. But that strike was the United States in Baghdad. One expects the United States has these capabilities in Iraq, where we have been for 20 years and have significant military assets. So that's not a huge shock. But for the Israelis to be able to carry out this kind of pinpoint strike, from Iraqi airspace on the capital, and the Iranians have no way to prevent it. What that should do is really send that clear message to Iran: we're done. We're done. And, I think it was very strategic in that, it was one person. It was the leadership of Hamas, which Israel has every right to go after. So it wasn't a mass casualty event like we saw in northern Israel. You could call it proportionate. So the hope would be under normal circumstances that the Iranians, as they did after Soleimani, would kind of say, okay, like we're done in this round. Unfortunately, we're in this unprecedented situation where it's almost not clear who the commander-in-chief of the United States is. We haven't heard from the president. We haven't seen the president. He has nothing on his schedule for days now. And, is the vice president essentially filling this role? It's not in her constitutional powers to do so, although she may be doing it on all practical ways. But my concern is, given that unprecedented flux and confusion, that the normal Iranian decision-making will be altered, and they might do something they wouldn't have tried even 2 months ago.
Wow. I wanted to ask you about that because you're right. We haven't heard from Biden, and there is a question mark of, okay, who is deciding the foreign policy right now from the White House? Do we have any indication on who that is? What are we hearing from Secretary Blinken?
Well, Secretary Blinken helpfully said today that Vice President Harris's forte is foreign policy.
Okay.
That can give us lots of confidence. Sounds like a man who's trying to keep his job. But, it's very unclear. And there seem to be regional fiefdoms. The person who's in my old job as the senior Middle East person, we called it senior director, or they call it coordinator. Brett McGurk appears to be largely in charge of Middle East policy. But another character who's very much in the mix is the special presidential envoy for energy and climate, Amos Hochstein, who has been running around Lebanon trying to broker deals between Israel and Hezbollah. It's not clear why that would be in his particular portfolio, but that's what those are what appear to be the power centers right now, at least for the Middle East. But that makes the whole thing so disjointed, because it's not clear how they're coordinating with the Pentagon, for example. Is there going to be a U.S. portion of this? Did the Israelis ask us for help? We just don't know any of this. And as I said, it just makes me think bad actors are using different calculus than what we're accustomed to.
Where does this leave peace talks between Israel and Hamas, and especially in thinking about the hostages that are still being held in Gaza? What are we looking at here now?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think, the hostage talks will be tabled for the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we will get back to that, because that, I think, is the critical thing to talk to Hamas about. But at the same time, there's a reason Hamas suddenly started spouting reason and potential concessions about 6 weeks ago, and pleading with the United States to intervene on their behalf and prevent those mean Israelis from actually finishing the job, because Israel correctly ignored the Biden administration when they insisted that going into Rafah was going to cause, World War III. They went into Rafah. They have broken down the last brigades that Hamas has there, and are in the process of sort of mopping that up, and then going back and redoing some other missions in Gaza, particularly in Gaza City, which they did sort of subjugate early on in the war, but Hamas kind of regrows. And so to actually finish this, they need to go back and mop up a little bit after those earlier operations. And as former President Trump said, they want to do this as quickly as possible. They're not enjoying it by any stretch of the imagination. But they need the job to be done. And so, I think that's why Hamas is suddenly saying, let's come to terms. Well, yeah. The terms are we win, you lose, to borrow Ronald Reagan's phrase. And that's, I think, where the Israelis need to stand. That was very much Prime Minister Netanyahu's message last week to Congress, is that this has become a very black and white proposition. There are not all the shades of gray that Kamala Harris likes to insist on, that there can be no sympathy for a Palestinian cause until they accept a loss in the war and come to terms.
Well, and we're seeing this strike carried out after another strike from Israel, specifically in Beirut on a Hezbollah leader, where a top leader of Hezbollah was killed. Will we see retaliation, do you think, from Hezbollah or Beirut in response to that strike? Obviously, that strike was carried out in response to that deadly attack on Israel that left 12 children and teens dead in northern Israel, in the Golan Heights. So what happens now? Will Hezbollah see that as, okay, that was proper retaliation and now we're done? Or is this, okay, no, we're going to ramp up?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on what the Iranians think, because
Okay.
they're the ones who are pulling the strings there. And it was a very important strike. Fouad Shukr was the second in command to Nasrallah for Hezbollah. And he had been the head of their military operations for a long time, was involved in the planning, for example, of the 1983 Beirut Marines barracks bombing that killed 241 American servicemen and women. And so he has American blood on his hands. There was a $5 million rewards for justice that the Trump administration had placed on his head. That you're supposed to capture them, but if they get killed, you still get your $5 million. And so this was somebody the United States very much wanted to get. And instead of, decrying the strike, which is really what Secretary Blinken did, concerns about escalation, concerns about undermining his precious negotiations for peace with Hamas, we should be writing them a thank you note. And have just avenged American blood and taken a very, very dangerous designated terrorist off the planet. So I think it was an appropriate response to the Druze attack. Important to remember, those Israeli children were Arab Israelis. They weren't Jews. And so, you have Hezbollah in a way going after its own because they have the gall to be happy, assimilated, successful Israeli citizens. So they are not differentiating between anyone here. So the question is, how far does Iran want to push it? They are in a somewhat perilous position politically with the death of President Raisi, the inauguration of the new president, the supreme leader's health in question, although that's been the case for 10 years, so you can't really predict based on that. But they have some real bad problems of their own, and they're also deeply concerned that Donald Trump might come back. And I think it's not a coincidence that the Trump assassination plot by Iran was revealed in the days after the debate, because I think they suddenly calculated that it was far more likely that he would come back and the maximum pressure campaign would come back and a tough American leader would come back who would have no time for their nonsense or their attacks on Israel and would stand strongly with Israel as he did during his first term in office. So I think that again is going to be a question for the Iranians. Do they want to, end this round, take a step back, let Israel finish it up in Gaza, and then sort of see where we are in November, or do they want to grab these couple of months with disarray at the White House and push their luck? It's a very dangerous spot.
Wow. Well, additionally, the U.S. this week carried out a strike in Iraq. What exactly was the U.S. targeting in Iraq and why?
Well, we've had these, I think, over 200 attacks on U.S. personnel and assets in the Middle East since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, which shows you in a macro sense that they don't differentiate between Israel and the United States. They don't care. We're the big Satan. Israel's the little Satan, but we're both Satan in this scenario. And so, that should be a signal to the administration that putting daylight between the United States and Israel only disadvantages us. It doesn't change their mindset one little bit. So we've had these endless attacks, and eventually they get so blatant and so brazen that the administration feels justified in taking what it takes, refers to as defensive maneuvers against the Iranian proxies, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, and that's what this was. It seems to have been de minimis. It's a little embarrassing compared to what the Israelis have pulled off in the last 48 hours. That we're hitting buildings and whatnot, to try to protect ourselves, not to actually advance our cause. But it does show you how very bad things are, particularly in Iraq for the United States.
Given the conflict of this week, just this week, what should America be looking at in terms of threat levels? Because I think we're obviously very focused on Israel and the possibility of further strikes, whether from Iran or from proxies being carried out on Israel. Is the U.S. also at threat of similar attacks?
Of course. I mean, we have heaven only knows what that has come up across our southern border and other immigration vulnerabilities that have not been stopped up by the Biden-Harris administration. And, you can call her the immigration czar or the border czar or whatever, or you could simply call her the vice president of the United States, who has a duty to defend our sovereign border. But the Biden administration has just utterly failed to protect the American people from bad actors that could potentially be part of these waves of illegal immigration that they've been encouraging. And we had 3 Palestinians scooped up in recent days that we happened to catch. But we know there have been Iranian nationals and others who have come across who could potentially have Hezbollah ties, or in the case of those 3 Palestinians, Hamas ties, and that they could be part of the groups that we're seeing marching in the streets of America, threatening heritage guards when they came past our building last week, burning American flags in front of Union Station, getting violent with the Capitol Police. That could, in an instant, because of who could be here in our country, unbeknownst to us, now in significant numbers, that could become an attack on us. And I don't want to alarm people, but this is why everyone has to be vigilant all the time. And we can't call these peaceful protests because they're not.
Mm-hmm. From the Biden-Harris administration, we have seen, like we've talked about, some repeated calls for Israel to kind of rein it in, pull back, play it safe. Given the escalation that we've just seen, do you imagine that rhetoric could potentially change? And also given the fact that we're 3 months out from an election, do you think that would also change rhetoric to where they might think, well, we need to be a little more aggressive on the world stage right now?
I don't think it's in their nature. I don't think they want to do it. I think what they're going to see that's going to make them the most nervous are rises in oil prices. We saw about a $2 spike overnight, literally. Those increases are going to start to manifest at the pump at the worst possible moment during the August travel season. I think that's going to make them extremely nervous and very much just trying to tamp everything down. And they won't care that these messages of, the United States is restraining Israel, we're slow walking ammunition, we're saying we won't stand with them, that hasn't led to peace. That hasn't led to lower gas prices, if that's all they care about. And that it's not going to work. It's not going to work now. So unfortunately, as I said, I don't think they're capable of changing course at this point. I think if they were any more forward-leaning, particularly the vice president, were any more forward-leaning on a pro-Israel stance, she would feel a real erosion in her base. And it's not just Arab Americans, although that is a problem for them. More broadly, it's their youth voter bloc. It's the 18 to 30-year-olds that they have to have countrywide, not just in Michigan, for her to get elected. And so, I don't think she is capable of subjugating that political imperative to do what is simply the right thing in terms of U.S. National security, which is support our ally Israel.
Heritage Foundation Vice President of the Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy, Victoria Coates. Victoria, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Virginia.